The final note hung in the air like a prayer. Elijah Brooks' hands hovered over the keys of the grand piano, trembling slightly. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His chest rose and fell with exhausted breaths. The massive chandelier above the Riverside Grand Theater cast a golden glow across the polished black surface of the Steinway, reflecting the faces of 300 people, who sat in absolute stunned silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The young man at the piano, 19 years old, wearing a borrowed suit jacket that didn't quite fit, had just played the final crescendo of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. His fingers had danced across 88 keys with a fury and passion that seemed impossible. The music had built and built, climbing higher and higher until that last devastating chord rang out. And then, silence. In the front row, Harrison Caldwell sat frozen, his mouth slightly open. The same Harrison Caldwell who just 3 hours earlier had laughed in Elijah's face. The same Harrison who had told him he didn't belong here. The same Harrison who had trained at Juilliard, who came from old money, who had never questioned his place in the world. Behind the judges' table, Catherine Morrison, a renowned concert pianist who had performed at Carnegie Hall, had tears streaming down her face. Her hand covered her mouth. She had judged hundreds of competitions. She had heard thousands of performances. But this was different. But how did we get here? How did a kid from the south side of the city who learned piano by watching YouTube videos on a cracked phone screen end up on this stage? How did someone they mocked, someone they dismissed, someone they laughed at? How did he silence an entire theater full of the city's elite? And what happened when that silence finally broke? To understand this moment, this impossible, beautiful, heartbreaking moment, we need to go back. Back to 72 hours earlier. Back to when Elijah Brooks first walked through the doors of the Riverside Grand Theater and heard laughter. Back to when Harrison Caldwell looked him up and down and smirked. Back to a choice that seemed crazy, a dream that seemed impossible, and a past that shaped everything. This is the story of Elijah Brooks. And it starts 3 days before that final note. It starts with a crumpled flyer, a mother's prayer, and a young man who refused to believe that his place in the world had already been decided. Let me tell you what really happened. 72 hours earlier, Elijah Brooks stood outside the Riverside Grand Theater, staring up at its towering columns and ornate architecture. The building looked like something out of a different century, a different world. Marble steps, brass fixtures, and a massive banner that read, "Annual Riverside Piano Competition. Prelims today." His worn sneakers felt out of place on those pristine steps. His backpack with its fraying straps contained everything he owned that mattered: a folder of sheet music he'd printed at the public library, a water bottle, and a photograph of his father. Elijah took a deep breath. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, exactly. From something else. From the weight of the moment. From the knowledge that everything, absolutely everything, rode on what happened in the next few hours. Around him, other contestants were arriving. And oh, what a difference. A young woman stepped out of a Mercedes, her parents trailing behind, carrying what was clearly a very expensive keyboard case. A young man in a tailored suit was on his phone, speaking rapidly in what sounded like Italian to his vocal coach. Another contestant, couldn't have been more than 16, was complaining to her mother about the piano teacher who hadn't been available for her morning practice session. Elijah watched them all. He said nothing. He had learned long ago that in spaces like this, silence was safer than speaking. He climbed the steps. Inside the theater's lobby was even more intimidating. Crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors that clicked with the sound of expensive shoes, oil paintings of famous pianists lining the walls, and everywhere were people who looked like they belonged. People in designer clothes, people with confident postures, people who had never questioned whether they deserved to be in a room like this. Elijah approached the registration table, where a woman with perfectly styled gray hair and reading glasses looked up from her clipboard. Name, she asked, not unkindly, but with the brisk efficiency of someone who had registered hundreds of contestants. Elijah Brooks. She scanned her list. Her finger paused. Ah, yes. Number 43. You're in the second group for preliminaries. That starts at 2 p.m. You can warm up in practice room 7 down that hallway. She handed him a name badge and a program. Good luck. Elijah pinned the badge to his chest, the cheap fabric of his shirt so different from the silk and cotton blend of the contestant before him, and headed toward the practice rooms. That's when he first saw Harrison Caldwell. The encounter happened in the hallway just outside practice room 5. Harrison was stepping out clearly finished with his warm-up, and he was accompanied by 2 other contestants who seemed to orbit him like planets around a sun. Harrison was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of build that suggested regular gym sessions and proper nutrition. His suit was charcoal gray, impeccably tailored with a burgundy tie that probably cost more than Elijah's entire outfit. His blonde hair was styled with product. His shoes were Italian leather. He looked like money. He looked like privilege. He looked like someone who had never been told no. Harrison's eyes landed on Elijah, and for a moment there was just assessment. The kind of look that takes in everything, the worn sneakers, the ill-fitting clothes, the cheap backpack, and makes a judgment in seconds. Then Harrison smiled. Not a friendly smile. A smile like a knife. "You competing, Harrison?" asked, his voice, carrying that particular tone of disbelief mixed with amusement. Elijah met his eyes. Yes. Huh. Harrison glanced at his companions who were already smirking. That's ambitious. One of Harrison's friends, a thin guy with wire-frame glasses, actually laughed. Dude, are you serious? You know, this is the Riverside Competition, right? Not some community center talent show. I know where I am, Elijah said quietly. Harrison stepped closer. He had the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences. Look, no offense, but do you even have formal training? Have you studied at a conservatory? Do you have any idea what you're up against here? Elijah felt the familiar burn in his chest. The same burn he'd felt 1,000 times before. In classrooms where teachers assumed he was in the wrong room. In stores where security followed him. In spaces where people looked at him and decided, without knowing anything about him, exactly who he was and what he was capable of. But he had learned to swallow that burn, to let it fuel him instead of consume him. I'm here to compete, Elijah said. Same as you. Harrison's smile widened. Okay. Sure. Good luck with that. He turned to his friends. Come on, let's get lunch before this circus starts. As they walked away, Elijah heard the laughter, heard the mocking tone, heard Harrison say just loud enough to be heard, I give him 2 minutes before he crashes and burns. Some people just don't know their place. Elijah stood in that hallway for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists. His heart was pounding. His jaw was tight. But then he closed his eyes and took a breath. He thought about his father. He thought about his mother working double shifts. He thought about the 1,000 hours he'd spent teaching himself note by note, piece by piece. And he walked into practice room 7. The room was small, with a single upright piano against one wall and a mirror on the other. The piano wasn't like the grand pianos in the main theater. This was a working instrument, functional, but not fancy. Elijah set down his backpack, rolled his shoulders, and sat down at the bench. He placed his hands on the keys. They felt like home. They always had. For the next hour, Elijah practiced. He ran through scales, warming up his fingers. He worked through the piece he'd chosen for the preliminary round, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat, Major Opus 9, number 2. He had chosen it carefully. It was beautiful, emotional, and technically demanding enough to showcase skill, but not so showy that it felt like he was trying too hard. More importantly, it was a piece his father had loved. Elijah remembered the first time he'd heard it. He'd been 8 years old, and his father had been playing it from a video on his phone while they drove to the hardware store where his dad worked. James Brooks had hummed along with the melody, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel, as if he could play the notes in the air. "That's Chopin," his father had said. "One of the greatest composers who ever lived. You know what's amazing about this piece? It's not about showing off. It's about feeling. Real feeling." 6 months later, James Brooks was gone. A workplace accident, a faulty scaffold, a fall that no one could have prevented and everyone would always remember. But that piece, that Chopin Nocturne, had stayed with Elijah. And when he finally found an old keyboard at a thrift store 2 years later, bought with money he'd saved from helping neighbors with yard work, the first thing he'd tried to learn was that Nocturne. It had taken him 8 months to play it all the way through. 8 months of watching YouTube tutorials, pausing and rewinding, trying to understand fingering and tempo and dynamics without a teacher to guide him. 8 months of practicing on a keyboard with 2 broken keys and tinny speakers. 8 months of his mother listening from the next room, sometimes crying, sometimes smiling, always supportive. And now, 11 years after his father had played that recording in the car, Elijah was about to perform it in front of judges at the Riverside competition. At exactly 2 p.m., an announcement crackled over the intercom system. "All Group 2 contestants, please report to the main theater for preliminary auditions." Elijah gathered his sheet music. Though he had the piece memorized, having it in his hands, felt safer and made his way to the theater. The main performance hall was breathtaking. It was a classical theater with red velvet seats arranged in curved rows rising up toward the back. The stage was massive, and at its center sat the most beautiful piano Elijah had ever seen, a Steinway Model D grand piano, its black lacquer surface gleaming under the stage lights. The theater could probably seat 400 people, but for the preliminary rounds, only the judges and a handful of audience members, mostly family and friends of contestants, were present. The judges sat at a long table in the front row, 5 of them. Elijah recognized a few from the program: Catherine Morrison, the concert pianist; David Chen, a composition professor from the State University; Margaret Porter, a retired symphony conductor; and 2 others whose credentials were equally impressive. 25 contestants were in Group 2. They would each perform one piece no longer than 5 minutes. The judges would select 10 to advance to the semifinals. The odds weren't great, but Elijah had faced worse odds before. Contestants performed in alphabetical order by last name, which meant Elijah Brooks would go early. Number 4, to be exact. He sat in the back row and watched the first 3 performances. Contestant 1 was a young woman who played a Mozart sonata with technical precision but little emotional depth. She was good, very good, but it felt rehearsed mechanical. Contestant 2 was a middle-aged man who chose a Beethoven piece and played it with passion, though he missed several notes. The judges made notes on their clipboards. Contestant 3 was a teenager who played a Debussy prelude beautifully. Genuinely beautifully. The kid had talent. Elijah could see it in the way his hands moved, the way he shaped the phrases. When he finished, there was genuine applause from the small audience. Then it was Elijah's turn. Contestant number 4, the moderator announced, Elijah Brooks performing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, number 2. Elijah stood. His legs felt strange, almost disconnected from his body. He walked down the aisle, up the steps to the stage, and across that vast expanse of polished wood. The stage lights were bright, brighter than he'd expected, and he could feel the heat of them on his skin. He sat down at the Steinway. The bench was at the perfect height. The keys were perfectly balanced, responsive to the slightest touch. This instrument was worth more than his family had made in the last 5 years combined. Elijah looked out at the judges. Catherine Morrison was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. The others looked neutral, professional. In the back of the theater, he could see some of the other contestants. Harrison Caldwell was there, arms crossed, that same smirk on his face. Elijah turned back to the piano. He placed his hands on the keys. He closed his eyes for just a moment, thinking of his father, thinking of that drive to the hardware store, thinking of 11 years of teaching himself, of struggling, of refusing to quit, and then he began to play. The opening notes of the Chopin Nocturne floated through the theater, delicate and haunting. Elijah's right hand carried the melody, while his left provided the gentle, rolling accompaniment. The piece started softly, almost like a whisper, and for the first few measures, Elijah felt his nervousness begin to fade. This was what he knew. This was what made sense. When his hands were on the keys, the rest of the world fell away. But to understand why this moment mattered so much, why every note carried the weight of years, we need to go back. Back before the competition. Back before the keyboard from the thrift store. Back to when Elijah Brooks was just a kid growing up on the south side of the city, back when his father was still alive. James Brooks had worked at Morrison Construction for 12 years. He was a good worker, reliable, strong, always showing up on time. But James had dreams that extended beyond building sites. He loved music. Jazz, mostly, but also classical. He couldn't afford lessons. As a kid, couldn't afford an instrument, but he would listen to records borrowed from the library and dream about what it might feel like to create something that beautiful. When Elijah was born, James made a promise to himself his son would have opportunities he never had. It didn't matter that money was tight. It didn't matter that they lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots were more common than piano music. James was determined. He would play music on his phone while they ate dinner. He would point out instruments in songs. You hear that? That's a saxophone. That's a trumpet. That's a piano. Listen to how they all work together. Young Elijah would listen fascinated. He didn't understand music theory or composition. He just knew that when the music played, his father's face changed. The stress lines around his eyes smoothed out. His shoulders, always tight from physical labor, would relax. Music was the one thing that could transform James Brooks from a tired construction worker into someone at peace. When Elijah was 6, James saved up for 3 months to buy him a small electronic keyboard from a pawn shop. 25 keys. Terrible speakers. But it worked. He set it up in Elijah's bedroom, which was really just one corner of the living room, separated by a curtain, and showed him where middle C was. Music is magic, Eli, his father, told him. And anybody can learn magic. You don't need to be rich. You don't need fancy things, you just need to practice. Elijah had pecked at those keys playing simple melodies. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Mary had a little lamb. His father would clap and cheer like he was watching a concert at Lincoln Center. For 2 years, that little keyboard was Elijah's favorite possession. He would practice every day after school, teaching himself simple songs, making up melodies. His mother, Diane, worked long hours as a home health aide, but she would always ask to hear what he'd learned when she got home. They were happy. Not wealthy, not comfortable, but happy. And then came March 15th. The day everything changed. James Brooks was working on a high-rise construction site downtown. He was 42 years old. He was wearing all his safety equipment. He was doing everything right. But scaffolding doesn't care about following the rules. A support beam failed. Inspectors would later determine it was a manufacturing defect, and the platform James was standing on collapsed. He fell 6 stories. By the time Diane got the call at work, James was already gone. By the time she picked up 8-year-old Elijah from school, unable to speak, just holding his hand too tight, Elijah knew something terrible had happened. By the time they got home, and she finally found the words to tell him, Elijah's world had fundamentally shifted. The funeral was small. Family. A few friends, some co-workers. The construction company sent flowers and a check settlement for the lawsuit that Diane's lawyer said she should pursue. It wouldn't bring James back, but it would help. Except it didn't help much, because after the lawyer's fees and the hospital bills and the funeral costs, there wasn't much left. Diane had to pick up extra shifts, then another job. By the time Elijah was 10, his mother was working as a home health aide during the day and cleaning offices at night. She would leave at 6 a.m. and sometimes not get home until 11 p.m. She would return exhausted, her feet aching, her back sore, but she would always ask Elijah about his day. "I'm doing this for you," she would tell him. "For your future. Your daddy wanted you to have opportunities. We're going to make sure you get them. But opportunities cost money, and money was scarce." The small keyboard from the pawn shop broke when Elijah was 9. One of the circuits fried, and they couldn't afford to fix it or replace it. For 2 years, Elijah didn't touch a piano, didn't play music. He threw himself into school instead, getting straight A's, staying out of trouble, trying to make his mother proud. But he missed it. God, how he missed it. He would hear music playing from cars or stores, and his fingers would twitch, remembering patterns, remembering melodies. He would dream about playing his hands, moving across invisible keys. When Elijah was 11, everything changed again, though this time for the better. He had been walking home from school, taking his usual route through the neighborhood, when he passed a thrift store he'd walked past 1,000 times before. Second Chances, it was called. The window display changed every week, sometimes furniture, sometimes clothes, sometimes random household items. That day, among the usual mix of donated goods, Elijah saw it. A keyboard. Not a nice one. Not even close. It was an old Casio, probably from the 1990s, with yellowed keys and a crack in the plastic casing. The price tag said $35. Elijah stood outside that window for 20 minutes, staring at it. $35 might as well have been $35,000. He didn't have it. His mother didn't have it. But he couldn't walk away. For the next 4 months, Elijah did everything he could to earn money. He offered to help neighbors carry groceries for tips. He collected cans and bottles for the deposit refund. He did yard work, raking leaves, shoveling snow, pulling weeds. He saved every single dollar. When his mother asked what he was saving for, he just said, "Something important." By July, he had $42. He went to second chances on a Saturday morning, the cash folded carefully in his pocket. His hands were shaking when he asked the elderly woman at the counter if the keyboard was still available. Oh, that old thing. She peered at it through her glasses. Been here for months. Tell you what, kid, you give me $30 and it's yours. You look like you actually want it, not like those folks who just buy stuff to resell online. Elijah couldn't believe it. He handed over the money, and she helped him carry the keyboard outside. It was heavier than it looked awkward to carry, but Elijah managed to get it the 8 blocks home. When he walked in the door, his mother looked up from the couch where she'd been resting before her night shift. Eli, what? Her eyes went wide. I saved up, he said. I bought it myself. I'm going to learn to play again, like Dad wanted. Diane Brooks stood up, walked over to her son, and hugged him so tight he could barely breathe. When she pulled back, there were tears in her eyes. Your father would be so proud of you, she whispered. That night, after his mother left for work, Elijah plugged in the keyboard. Half the keys were sticky. The speakers crackled. But when he pressed middle C, the note rang out clear enough. He played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Then Mary Had a Little Lamb. And then he realized if he wanted to get better, he needed to learn properly. But lessons cost money they didn't have. Teachers cost money they didn't have. So Elijah taught himself. He went to the public library and checked out books on piano technique, music theory, sight reading. The librarian, Mrs. Patterson, noticed his dedication and started setting aside any music books that came in. She even let him use the library's ancient desktop computer to access YouTube. That's where Elijah found his real teachers. Free tutorials from pianists around the world, videos explaining scales, chord progressions, proper hand position. He would watch on the library computer. They only allowed 30-minute sessions, so he would take notes, furiously memorizing everything he could, and then practice at home on his cracked Casio. It was slow. It was frustrating. There were times when he wanted to quit, when his fingers wouldn't do what his brain told them to do, when a passage seemed impossible. But he kept thinking about his father, about James Brooks humming along to Chopin in the car, about that promise, you don't need to be rich, you just need to practice. So Elijah practiced. For 7 years he practiced. While other kids his age were hanging out playing video games, going to parties, Elijah was at home with his keyboard or at the library with music books. His mother would come home late at night to find him still playing, and she never once told him to stop. That's your gift, she would say. Your talent. Don't ever let anyone tell you it doesn't matter. But it was lonely. Elijah didn't have many friends. The kids at school either didn't understand his obsession or actively mocked it. Why are you wasting time with that, they'd ask. It's not like you're going to be some famous pianist. Get real. The isolation hurt, but it also strengthened his resolve. Every time someone said he couldn't, every time someone laughed, every time someone suggested he should be more realistic, Elijah practiced harder. By the time he was 16, Elijah had taught himself dozens of pieces. He could play Bach preludes, Beethoven sonatas, and Chopin nocturnes. He wasn't perfect without a teacher to correct bad habits. He'd developed some technical issues, but he was good. Genuinely good. He performed once at a school talent show. Most acts were singers or dancers or comedy sketches. When Elijah sat down at the school's ancient upright piano and played a Chopin waltz, the gym went quiet. When he finished, there was a moment of stunned silence, and then applause. Real applause. A teacher approached him afterward. Elijah, have you ever thought about applying to music schools? You're talented enough, but music schools cost money. Conservatories cost money. Private lessons, competition fees, proper instruments, it all cost money. And money was something the Brooks family simply didn't have. Elijah smiled politely at the teacher. "I'll think about it." But he didn't think about it. What was the point? His world was defined by practical limitations. His mother was still working 2 jobs. They were still living paycheck to paycheck. The idea of pursuing music professionally seemed as distant as the moon. Until 3 months before the Riverside competition, Elijah saw a flyer at the library. Mrs. Patterson had posted it on the community bulletin board. Annual Riverside Piano Competition, it read. Open to all ages. First prize, $50,000, and a full scholarship to the music conservatory of your choice. Auditions begin October 15th. Elijah stared at that flyer for a long time. $50,000 would change everything. It would take care of his mother, would give her a chance to work less, to rest. A full scholarship would give him a chance to study music for real, with actual teachers with opportunities he'd never dreamed possible. But Riverside was the most prestigious piano competition in the state. The best players competed. People who had trained at Juilliard, Berkeley, Curtis. People who had private instructors and grand pianos at home. People who came from the kind of families where a $50,000 prize was nice, but not life-changing. Elijah had learned piano from YouTube videos on a cracked keyboard. Still, he took a photo of the flyer with his phone. That night he showed it to his mother. Diane was exhausted from her shift, her uniform still smelling faintly of antiseptic, but she looked at the flyer carefully. Then she looked at her son. "Do you want to do this?" she asked. "I don't know if I'm good enough," Elijah admitted. His mother set down the flyer and took his hands in hers. Her hands were rough, weathered by years of hard work, but they were warm. "Let me tell you something your father used to say," she told him. "He said the world is going to try to tell you who you are and what you're capable of. And most of the time the world is wrong. The only person who really knows what you're capable of is you." She squeezed his hands. "You've taught yourself piano, Eli. You've practiced for 7 years on a broken keyboard. You've made yourself into something extraordinary. If you want to try for this, then you try. And whatever happens, I'm proud of you." So Elijah registered for the competition. He paid the $50 registration fee with money he'd saved from a summer job bagging groceries. He chose his preliminary piece carefully, the Chopin Nocturne, his father's favorite. And he practiced every spare moment he had. But even as he practiced, doubt gnawed at him. He had no illusions about what he was up against. He'd looked up previous winners of the Riverside competition online. They all came from privilege. They all had formal training. They all fit the profile of what a serious classical pianist looked like. Elijah was none of those things. Still, he showed up. Because his mother believed in him. Because his father would have wanted him to try. And because somewhere deep in his chest, beneath all the doubt and fear, there was a small flame of hope that refused to go out. That flame had carried him through the doors of the Riverside Grand Theater. It had carried him through Harrison Caldwell's mockery. It had carried him onto this stage in front of these judges to this piano. And now, as his hands moved across the keys playing the Nocturne, his father had loved that flame burned brighter than it ever had before. Elijah's performance of the Chopin Nocturne unfolded like a story. His right hand sang the melody with a tenderness that came from years of loving this piece, while his left hand provided the gentle, rocking accompaniment that gave the music its dreamlike quality. He shaped the phrases with care, bringing out the subtle dynamics, soft passages that whispered swells that built emotion, a delicate rubato that made the music breathe. In the judges section, Catherine Morrison leaned forward slightly. Her pen, which had been poised to take notes, remained still. She was just listening. The nocturne moved through its arc, starting peaceful building to a passionate middle section where the melody soared, then returning to the gentle theme before fading away. When Elijah played the final notes, letting them ring out before gently releasing the keys, there was a moment of silence in the theater. Then scattered applause. Not thunderous, not overwhelming, but genuine. A few people in the small audience actually smiled. Elijah stood, nodded to the judges, and walked off stage. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline hitting him all at once. He had no idea if it had been good enough. He had no idea what the judges thought. But he had done it. He had actually done it. Back in his seat, he tried to calm his breathing and watched the rest of the preliminary round. Contestant 5 was a young woman who played a Brahms intermezzo with impressive technique, but rushed the tempo. Contestant 6 was an older man who chose a Schubert impromptu and played it beautifully with real maturity. Contestant 7 was a teenager who attempted a Liszt etude and stumbled through several passages, clearly overwhelmed by the difficulty. And then there was contestant 18, Harrison Caldwell. When Harrison walked onto the stage, he carried himself with absolute confidence. He adjusted the bench, precisely cracked his knuckles once, and settled his hands over the keys. The piece he'd chosen was Chopin's Grande Valse Brillante in E-flat major. It was a showpiece, flashy fast, technically demanding, and Harrison played it brilliantly. His fingers flew across the keys with precision. Every trill was clean, every run was even, every chord was perfectly voiced. The waltz sparkled under his hands, charming and virtuosic. It was the kind of performance that announced loud and clear, "I am a serious pianist." When he finished, the applause was stronger than it had been for anyone else. Harrison stood bowed with practiced grace and walked off stage with that same confident stride. As he passed through the seating area, he caught Elijah's eye and smiled. That same knife-edge smile. The message was clear. See the difference. Elijah looked away. The preliminary round continued. 25 contestants total. Some were excellent. Some were merely competent. A few crashed and burned nerves getting the better of them. By the time the last contestant finished, a middle-aged woman who played a Debussy prelude with lovely impressionistic tone, it was nearly 5 p.m. The judges conferred for 30 minutes, while the contestants waited, tension thick in the air. Finally, Catherine Morrison stood and approached the microphone. "Thank you all for your performances today," she said, her voice clear and professional. "The level of talent we've heard is impressive. We will now announce the 10 contestants advancing to the semi-final round, which will take place in 3 days." She read from a list. Names were called one by one. Each name prompted either relief and joy or disappointment and resignation. Contestant 6. The man who played Schubert advanced. Contestant 9 advanced. Contestant 14 advanced. Harrison Caldwell's name was called. Of course it was. He nodded, unsurprised. More names. Elijah's hands were clenched in his lap. He tried to prepare himself for disappointment, tried to remember that just competing had been an achievement, tried to Elijah Brooks. His head snapped up. Had he heard that right? Catherine Morrison was looking at her list. Contestant number 4, Elijah Brooks. He had made it. He had actually made it. Elijah barely heard the last few names being called. His heart was hammering so hard, he thought it might burst from his chest. He had advanced to the semi-finals. He was one of 10 contestants out of 25. He had done it. After the announcement, contestants were given information packets about the semi-final round. The rules were more stringent now. Each performer would play a single piece no longer than 8 minutes to be chosen from an approved list of classical works. The judges would select 5 finalists. As Elijah gathered his things, preparing to leave, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Catherine Morrison standing there. Up close, she was smaller than she appeared on stage, but her eyes were sharp and kind. "Elijah Brooks," she said. "That Chopin was lovely. Where do you study?" The question hung in the air. Elijah considered lying. It would be easier. But something in Catherine Morrison's expression suggested she genuinely wanted to know. "I don't," he said. "I taught myself. From videos and books." Her eyebrows rose. "Self-taught?" "Really, yes, ma'am." She studied him for a moment. "That's remarkable. Your technique has some rough edges. I noticed your left hand was a bit stiff in places and your pedaling could be cleaner, but your musicality is exceptional. You play with genuine feeling. That's rarer than you might think." "Thank you," Elijah managed. "Have you considered applying to conservatories? With the right instruction, you could go far." The same question he'd been asked before. The same impossible dream. "I'm hoping to," Elijah said carefully. "That's why I entered this competition. The scholarship prize." Understanding flickered in Catherine Morrison's eyes. She nodded slowly. "I see. Well, you've made it to the semi-finals on talent and determination alone. That says a lot about you. Keep working hard. I will." As she walked away, Elijah felt something shift inside him. A judge, a real accomplished concert pianist, had told him he had talent, had told him he could go far. It wasn't pity or politeness. It was genuine assessment from someone who knew what she was talking about. Maybe, just maybe, he actually belonged here. That feeling lasted until he reached the parking lot. Harrison Caldwell was leaning against a luxury sedan surrounded by his usual group of admirers. When he saw Elijah emerge from the theater, he straightened up. "Well, well," Harrison called out. "Look who made it through. Congratulations." Elijah nodded, trying to just walk past, but Harrison stepped into his path. "I'm actually impressed." Harrison continued his tone, suggesting the opposite. "I figured you'd crash and burn, but I guess they needed to fill out the semi-finals, and hey, diversity matters, right?" The words hit like a slap. Elijah felt his jaw tighten. "I made it through on my performance," Elijah said quietly. "Same as you." Harrison laughed. Sure you did. Look, here's some free advice. Don't embarrass yourself in the semi-finals. This was cute, you making it this far. But the competition gets real now. You're going to be up against people who have studied at the best schools in the world, people who've been playing since they were 4 years old, people who actually know what they're doing. One of Harrison's friends chimed in. "Yeah, man, no offense, but you're out of your league. Maybe just bow out gracefully. Save yourself the humiliation." Elijah looked at each of them, at their expensive clothes, their expensive cars, their expensive confidence that came from never having to worry about money or acceptance or belonging. "Thanks for the advice," Elijah said flatly. "I'll see you at the semi-finals." He walked away, ignoring the laughter that followed him. He walked the 12 blocks to the bus stop, his backpack heavy on his shoulders. He rode the bus for 40 minutes back to his neighborhood. He walked the 3 blocks from the bus stop to his apartment building. When he got home, his mother was there. She had the evening off for once. She was in the kitchen making dinner spaghetti with sauce from a jar garlic bread from the frozen section. Simple food, but it smelled like home. "Well," she asked, turning around. "How did it go?" Elijah dropped his backpack and smiled. For the first time all day, a real, genuine smile. I made it to the semifinals. Diane Brooks shrieked with joy. She dropped her wooden spoon and threw her arms around her son, hugging him tight. Oh, baby, I knew it. I knew you could do it. They celebrated that night with spaghetti and the small chocolate cake Diane had bought just in case. They talked about the competition, about the theater, about the other contestants. Elijah told her about Catherine Morrison's compliment. He didn't tell her about Harrison Caldwell's mockery. There was no point in darkening her joy. 3 days, Diane said. 3 days until the semifinals. What piece are you going to play? Elijah had already been thinking about it. The approved list included dozens of options, everything from Bach to contemporary composers. But one piece kept pulling at him. Beethoven, he said. Piano Sonata No. 8, the Pathétique. His mother's eyes went wide. That's a big piece, isn't it? It is, Elijah admitted. But it fits. The whole sonata is about struggle and triumph, about fighting through darkness to find light. It feels right. Diane reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Then that's what you'll play. And you'll be magnificent. For the next 3 days, Elijah lived and breathed Beethoven's Pathétique Sonata. He couldn't practice on a real piano, the apartment complex didn't have one, and he couldn't afford to rent practice space. So he practiced on his old Casio keyboard, the one with the cracked keys, and visualized performing on a grand piano. He listened to recordings, studying different interpretations. He went to the library and read everything he could about Beethoven, about the historical context of the sonata, about the composer's own struggles with deafness and despair. The first movement of the Pathétique was marked grave allegro, solemn, then fast. It opened with dark, dramatic chords, before launching into a passionate, turbulent allegro section. The second movement was the famous Adagio cantabile, a beautiful singing melody that contrasted sharply with the drama of the first and third movements. The third movement was a rondo, quick and energetic, bringing the work to a rousing conclusion. Elijah decided to play all 3 movements. It was ambitious. The complete sonata ran about 18 minutes, far longer than most contestants would attempt. But the semi-final rules allowed for pieces up to 8 minutes for each of the 3 sections if they were from a multi-movement work, and Elijah wanted to tell the complete story. He practiced obsessively. His fingers moved over the keyboard even when he was away from it on the bus, while walking, while lying in bed at night. He dreamed in music, the notes of the Pathétique, running through his subconscious. His mother would come home from work to find him still practicing at midnight. She never told him to stop. She would just kiss the top of his head and go to bed. And sometimes Elijah would hear her praying in the next room. Praying for her son. Praying for a miracle. On the morning of the semifinals, Elijah woke up at 5 a.m. He couldn't sleep. He got up, made instant coffee, and sat at his keyboard one last time. He played through the Pathétique, quietly, his fingers barely pressing the keys, just reminding his muscle memory of every phrase, every transition, every dynamic shift. His mother emerged from her bedroom at 6. She made him breakfast eggs and toast and insisted he eat, even though his stomach was in knots. "You're going to do beautifully," she told him. "No matter what happens, you're already a success. You hear me? You taught yourself piano. You made it to the semifinals of one of the biggest competitions in the state. You've already done something extraordinary." Elijah nodded, but he couldn't speak. The weight of the day ahead was pressing down on him. At noon, he arrived at the Riverside Grand Theater for the second time. The atmosphere was different now, more intense, more focused. Only 10 contestants remained, and they all knew that 5 of them would be going home today. Elijah checked in, received his schedule. He was performing 6th out of 10 and made his way to a practice room. He warmed up carefully, running through scales and arpeggios, playing through the tricky passages of the pathétique one more time. At 2 p.m., the semi-finals began. The quality of performance had noticeably elevated. These were the best of the preliminary round, and it showed. The first contestant played a breathtaking Rachmaninoff prelude. The second performed a Liszt Hungarian Rhapsody with dazzling virtuosity. The third chose a contemporary piece by Philip Glass, bringing a modern sensibility to the competition. And then came contestant 4, Harrison Caldwell. Harrison had chosen Liszt's transcendental Etude No. 5, Feux Follet, Will-o'-the-Wisps. It was one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire, a whirlwind of rapid notes meant to evoke flickering lights. It required phenomenal technique, and Harrison delivered. His hands blurred across the keys, executing the impossible runs and leaps with machine-like precision. When he finished, the applause was loud and sustained. Harrison bowed, and as he walked off stage, his eyes found Elijah in the audience. That look said everything beat that. Contestant 5 performed a Brahms Rhapsody with mature, thoughtful interpretation. And then, it was Elijah's turn. Contestant number 6, Elijah Brooks, performing Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 8 in C minor, the Pathétique. Elijah stood. His legs felt weak, his hands felt cold. But he walked down that aisle, up those steps, across that stage. He sat at the Steinway, adjusted the bench, placed his hands over the keys. And then he thought about his father, about James Brooks, who had loved music but never had the chance to really pursue it, about his mother who worked herself to exhaustion so her son could have opportunities, about 7 years of practicing on a broken keyboard, about every person who had ever told him to be realistic, to know his place, to stop dreaming. Elijah took a breath, and he began. The opening of Beethoven's Pathétique Sonata was like a thunderclap. Elijah's hands came down on those first solemn chords, dark, dramatic, full of weight and gravitas. The grave introduction was meant to be slow and serious, almost like a pronouncement, and Elijah played it with deep intensity. Each chord rang out, filling the theater with Beethoven's profound sense of struggle. Then, after the introduction established its somber mood, the music exploded into the allegro section. Suddenly, Elijah's hands were racing across the keys in ascending and descending runs, the left hand providing a driving bass line, while the right hand carved out the anguished melody. This was the heart of the first movement, passionate, turbulent fighting against fate. Elijah poured everything into it, every hour of practice, every moment of doubt, every memory of his father. The music surged and retreated, built tension, and released it, climbed and fell. His body swayed with the phrases totally absorbed in Beethoven's emotional landscape. In the judges section, Catherine Morrison had stopped taking notes. She was simply watching, her expression unreadable but intent. The first movement concluded with a powerful statement of the main theme driving toward a final decisive cadence. Elijah let the last chord ring out for a moment, before moving immediately into the second movement without pause. The Adagio Cantabile. The slow singing movement was like emerging from darkness into light. The famous melody floated from Elijah's right hand, pure and clear and heartbreakingly beautiful. This was the movement everyone knew, the melody that had been featured in films and commercials, but Elijah didn't play it like background music. He played it like a prayer. His left hand provided a gentle rocking accompaniment, while his right hand sang. The melody moved through its arc building to a more passionate section in the middle before returning to the opening theme. Elijah shaped each phrase with care, finding the humanity in Beethoven's notes, the longing, the hope, the quiet resilience. Some people in the audience closed their eyes, just listening. In the back row, one elderly woman had tears streaming down her face. The second movement faded away on a soft, peaceful note, and then Elijah launched into the third movement, the rondo finale. This was the triumph after the struggle, quick and energetic and full of forward momentum. Elijah's fingers danced across the keys, the playful main theme contrasting with more dramatic episodes. The music sparkled, it surged, it refused to be held back. The final pages built to an exhilarating climax, the hands coming together in powerful octaves, driving toward the last triumphant chords. When Elijah struck the final notes, he felt like he'd run a marathon. His heart was pounding. His hands were trembling. His shirt was damp with sweat. For a moment, there was silence. And then the audience erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It wasn't restrained appreciation. People were on their feet, not everyone but many clapping hard, some shouting bravo. A few were wiping their eyes. In the front row, Catherine Morrison was applauding with her hands raised high, a broad smile on her face. Elijah stood, bowed deeply, and walked off stage on unsteady legs. He made it to the wings before his knees almost gave out. He leaned against the wall, breathing hard, hardly believing what had just happened. A stagehand offered him a bottle of water. That was incredible, man. Seriously. Thanks, Elijah managed, his voice rough. He returned to his seat to watch the remaining performances. The seventh contestant played a Prokofiev sonata with sharp, modern edge. The eighth performed a Scarlatti sonata with Baroque precision. The ninth chose Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, bringing a jazzy American flavor to the competition. And the 10th contestant played a Schumann fantasy with romantic expressiveness. When the final performer finished, the judges retired to deliberate. The wait was agonizing. 30 minutes stretched into an eternity. Elijah sat in his seat, his mind replaying every note of his performance, analyzing every tiny mistake, worrying that he'd rushed a passage or missed a dynamic marking. Finally, the judges returned. Catherine Morrison took the microphone again. Thank you all for the exceptional performances today. The decision was not easy. However, we have selected 5 finalists who will compete in 3 days for the grand prize. She began reading names. Contestant 2, Jennifer Martinez. A young woman in the front row gasped with joy. Contestant 3, Michael Park. More applause. Contestant 4, Harrison Caldwell. Of course, Harrison stood nodded with that same cool confidence and sat back down. Contestant 6, Elijah Brooks. Elijah's breath caught. He'd made it. He'd actually made it to the finals. And contestant 9, Sarah Chen. That was it. 5 finalists. Elijah had advanced to the final round of the Riverside Piano Competition. He was 1 step away from the $50,000 prize and the scholarship. 1 step away from changing everything. After the announcement, as contestants gathered their things and families came forward to congratulate the finalists, Elijah felt someone approach. He turned to find an older black man, maybe in his 60s, wearing a well-tailored suit. Elijah Brooks, the man asked. Yes, sir. The man extended his hand. Gerald Matthews. I'm a professor at the City Conservatory and I wanted to introduce myself. That Beethoven you just played, that was extraordinary. Catherine tells me you're self-taught. Yes, sir. Professor Matthews shook his head in amazement. Remarkable. You have raw talent, son. Real talent. But you also have some technical issues that proper training could fix. Your posture could be better. Your hand position needs work, and you're using too much arm weight in some passages. But your musicality, your ability to communicate emotion through music, that's something that can't really be taught. You either have it or you don't. He handed Elijah a business card. After this competition is over, come see me. Whether you win or not, I'd like to work with you. We might be able to arrange something scholarship-wise. Elijah stared at the card. Thank you, sir. Thank you. You've earned it, Professor Matthews said. Now you have 3 days to prepare for the finals. What are you going to play? Elijah had been thinking about this since he'd first entered the competition. He knew what piece he wanted to play. He'd always known. But saying it out loud made it real, made it terrifying. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, Elijah said. The first movement. Professor Matthews's eyebrows shot up. That's ambitious. One of the most difficult and beloved pieces in the repertoire. I know. Have you performed it before? No, sir. But I've been studying it for 3 years, and it feels right. The professor studied him for a long moment, then smiled. Then play it with everything you have, and don't hold back. As Professor Matthews walked away, Elijah felt someone else approach. He turned to find Harrison Caldwell standing there, arms crossed. So, Harrison said, we meet in the finals. Looks like it. Harrison's expression was hard to read. I have to admit I didn't think you'd make it this far. That Beethoven was decent. Thanks, Elijah said flatly, recognizing the backhanded compliment. But the finals are a different level. Rachmaninoff too. Really? That's what you're going with. That's what I'm playing. Harrison laughed, but it wasn't friendly. You know that piece requires an orchestra, right? They're going to have you play with a recorded accompaniment. It's harder than you think. The coordination, the timing, one slip, and the whole thing falls apart. I'll manage. I'm playing Rachmaninoff 3, Harrison said. The third concerto. The hardest piece Rachmaninoff ever wrote, just so you know what you're up against. Of course he was. Harrison always had to go bigger, harder, more impressive. May the best pianist win, Elijah said. Harrison's smile was cold. Oh, he will. Trust me. 3 days. Elijah had 3 days to prepare for the most important performance of his life. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto. No. 2 was a monument of the piano repertoire. Written by the Russian composer in 1901, it was born from Rachmaninoff's own struggle with depression and self-doubt. After his first symphony was savaged by critics, Rachmaninoff had fallen into a deep creative crisis, unable to compose for nearly 3 years. It was only through therapy and the encouragement of friends that he found his way back to music. The second piano concerto was his triumphant return, a work of tremendous emotional depth, technical brilliance, and romantic passion. The first movement which Elijah had chosen to perform opened with a series of solemn chords from the piano, gradually building in intensity before the orchestra swept in with the lush, romantic main theme. The piano and orchestra engaged in a constant dialogue. Sometimes the piano carried the melody, while the orchestra provided support. Sometimes the orchestra surged forward, while the piano added flourishes and commentary. There were passages of thundering octaves, delicate filigree, and powerful climaxes. It was approximately 20 minutes long and demanded everything from the performer technique, stamina, emotional depth, and perfect coordination with the orchestral accompaniment. Since there wasn't a live orchestra available for the competition, finalists would perform with a high-quality recorded orchestral track through the theater's sound system. It meant wearing an earpiece to hear the accompaniment clearly and being precisely on time with every entrance. There was no margin for error. Elijah knew this piece intimately. He had discovered it 5 years ago when he was 14 and had been mesmerized by a recording featuring pianist Yuja Wang. The passion, the drama, the sheer emotional power of the music had struck him like lightning. From that moment, he'd been studying it, slowly learning the piano part, measure by measure, without any orchestra, just so he could understand how the piece worked. But studying a piece and performing it in competition were two entirely different things. The problem was practice space. Elijah's Casio keyboard at home was inadequate for a work like this. The Rachmaninoff required the full range of a piano, the weight of real keys, the response of hammers hitting strings. He needed to practice on an actual grand piano, but he had no access to one. That's when Professor Matthews' card became a lifeline. The day after the semi-finals, Elijah called the number on the business card. Professor Matthews answered on the second ring. "Professor, this is Elijah Brooks. We spoke yesterday after Elijah." "Of course. How can I help you?" Elijah explained his situation. No access to a proper piano. The conservatory had practice rooms, but they were reserved for enrolled students. "Was there any way—" "Come to the conservatory tomorrow morning," Professor Matthews interrupted. "I'll arrange for you to use one of our practice studios. The building opens at 6 a.m. You can have room 214 for as long as you need it over the next 3 days. Elijah nearly dropped the phone. "Professor, thank you. Thank you so much. Just promise me you'll work hard." And Elijah, "Don't try to practice for 12 hours straight. Your hands will cramp, and you'll do more harm than good. Practice smart. Take breaks. Stay focused." The next morning, Elijah arrived at the city conservatory at 6 a.m. sharp. The building was beautiful, a historic brick structure with arched windows and practice rooms with soundproofing. Professor Matthews was waiting in the lobby to let him in and show him to room 214. The practice room contained a Yamaha grand piano, not as prestigious as a Steinway, but a professional quality instrument nonetheless. When Elijah sat down and played his first notes, the difference from his Casio was staggering. The keys responded to the slightest touch. The sound was rich, full resonant. This was what a real piano felt like. He spent the first hour just getting used to the instrument, playing scales and exercises, adjusting to the weight of the keys and the responsiveness of the pedals. Then he loaded the orchestral accompaniment track onto his phone, connected it to a small speaker, and began working through the Rachmaninoff. The opening chords, those famous solemn chords that set the tone for the entire movement, felt different on a grand piano. They had more weight, more gravity. Elijah played them over and over, finding the right balance between power and control. Then came the main theme when the orchestra entered. Elijah put in his earpiece and started the track, trying to sync his playing with the recorded orchestra. It was harder than he'd anticipated. The track didn't wait for him. If he hesitated even slightly, he'd fall behind. If he rushed, he'd get ahead. It required absolute precision. He worked on that coordination for hours, stopping and starting, rewinding, trying again. By noon, his hands were sore and his head was pounding. He took a break, ate the sandwich he'd packed, and called his mother. "How's it going?" Diane asked. "It's hard," Elijah admitted. "Really hard. But the piano here is incredible, and I'm learning so much. You're going to be amazing, baby. I know it." After the call, Elijah returned to practice. He worked through the afternoon, focusing on the most difficult passages, the rapid octave runs in the middle section. the cascading arpeggios near the end, the coordination of the big climaxes. By 6 p.m., when the conservatory closed, his fingers were cramping and his back ached from sitting, but he'd made real progress. He went home, ate a quick dinner with his mother, and collapsed into bed, his mind still hearing the Rachmaninoff even in his sleep. The next 2 days followed the same pattern. 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. at the conservatory, working obsessively on the piece. Professor Matthews stopped by each day to check on him, offering advice on technique and interpretation. "You're pushing too hard in this section," the professor said on the second day, pointing to a passage. "Let the music breathe. Rachmaninoff isn't about force, it's about passion. There's a difference." Elijah adjusted his approach, trying to find that balance between power and nuance. On the third day, Professor Matthews brought him a gift, a recording of the orchestral track used in the actual competition, so Elijah could practice with the exact version he'd be performing with. That final day, Elijah ran through the complete first movement 5 times with the official track, working on timing, on emotional pacing, on stamina. By evening, he felt as ready as he'd ever be. But ready wasn't the same as confident. He was terrified. Terrified of making mistakes. Terrified of not being good enough. Terrified of letting down his mother, Professor Matthews, everyone who believed in him. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his hands unconsciously moving through the fingerings of difficult passages. Around 2 a.m., his mother knocked softly on his door. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "No." She came in and sat on the edge of his bed. "You know what your father used to say when he was worried about something? What he'd say, 'Diane, I can't control everything. All I can control is showing up and doing my best. And if my best isn't enough, at least I'll know I tried.'" She smoothed his hair. "You've prepared, Eli. You've worked harder than anyone else in that competition. Now all you can do is show up and do your best. And no matter what happens, you've already made me so proud." Elijah felt tears prick his eyes. "What if I mess up? What if I freeze or forget a passage or—" "Then you'll keep going," his mother said firmly. "You don't stop. You push through. That's what you've always done. That's who you are." The morning of the finals arrived gray and cold. November in the city meant bare trees and bitter wind. Elijah dressed carefully in his only decent outfit: black pants, white shirt, the borrowed jacket that still didn't quite fit. His mother helped him with his tie, her hands shaking slightly. "You look so handsome," she said. "Your father would be so proud." They arrived at the Riverside Grand Theater an hour early. This time the atmosphere was completely different. The theater was packed, every seat filled. There were local news cameras, reporters with microphones. The finals were a major cultural event in the city, and people had come out in force. Backstage, the 5 finalists gathered in the green room. Jennifer Martinez looked nervous, constantly reviewing her sheet music. Michael Park was doing breathing exercises. Sarah Chen was calmly stretching her hands. And Harrison Caldwell sat in a corner, earbuds in, eyes closed, projecting an aura of total confidence. Elijah found a quiet corner and tried to center himself. He thought about his father, about his mother out in the audience, about 7 years of practice, about every person who had believed in him and every person who had doubted him. At exactly 2 p.m., the finals began. The format was simple. Each finalist would perform their chosen piece in the order they'd drawn that morning. The judges would score each performance based on technique, interpretation, musicality, and overall impact. After all 5 had performed, the winner would be announced. Elijah had drawn position 4. He'd have to sit through 3 performances, his anxiety building before his turn came. Jennifer Martinez performed first, playing Prokofiev's Piano Concerto No. 3. She was technically proficient, hitting all the right notes, but the performance lacked fire. It was correct, but not compelling. Michael Park played Grieg's Piano Concerto. His interpretation was solid, workmanlike, but it didn't transport the audience anywhere special. Then came Harrison Caldwell. Harrison had chosen Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, a beast of a piece, even harder than the second concerto, and he played it with jaw-dropping technical facility. His fingers were a blur during the rapid passages. His octaves were clean and powerful. He navigated the fiendish difficulties of the piece with apparent ease. But as Elijah listened, he noticed something. Harrison's performance was technically perfect, but it was cold, mechanical. It was like watching a computer execute a program, impressive but soulless. There was no vulnerability, no real emotion, just technique on display. When Harrison finished, the applause was strong but not overwhelming. He'd impressed the audience, but he hadn't moved them. Harrison walked off stage and back to the green room, and as he passed Elijah, he whispered, "Good luck following that." Then it was Elijah's turn. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed through the theater. "Our 4th finalist, Elijah Brooks, performing the first movement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor." Elijah stood. His legs felt like jelly. He walked through the wings onto the stage, and the blast of light and heat from the stage lights hit him. The audience was a dark mass beyond the glare. He could see the judges in the front row. He could see the cameras. He sat down at the Steinway, adjusted the bench, placed his hands over the keys. Someone fitted the earpiece into his ear. He'd hear the orchestral track through that. The sound engineer gave him a thumbs up. Elijah took a breath. This was it. Everything came down to the next 20 minutes. He thought of his father one last time, pictured James Brooks smiling, encouraging him, and then Elijah began to play. The opening chords of Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto rang out across the Riverside Grand Theater, and in that instant everything else ceased to exist. Elijah's hands struck the keys with careful intensity. The first chord, C minor, deep and resonant, was marked pianissimo quiet, but not timid. Then another chord, slightly louder. Then another, and another, each one building incrementally in volume and intensity like a wave gathering force. This was the genius of Rachmaninoff's opening, starting from almost nothing and gradually, inevitably building toward something overwhelming. Through his earpiece, Elijah could hear the recorded orchestra waiting, holding back, letting the piano establish the mood. The chords continued their crescendo, his hands moving with increasing urgency up the keyboard, louder, more forceful, building, 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 and then the orchestra swept in. The strings entered with the lush, romantic main theme, and Elijah's hands shifted from those opening chords to the accompanying figures arpeggios that swirled around the melody like wind, adding texture and color. The timing was crucial here. If he rushed even slightly, he'd get ahead of the orchestra. If he dragged, he'd fall behind. But Elijah had practiced this transition hundreds of times, and his body knew what to do. The main theme unfolded gorgeous and yearning, and Elijah provided the piano's commentary runs and trills and flourishes that wove between the orchestral lines. Then came his big entrance when the piano took over the melody. Elijah's right hand sang out the theme, while his left hand provided the rich, rolling accompaniment. This was Rachmaninoff at his most romantic, the kind of melody that could break your heart with its beauty. In the audience, people leaned forward. In the front row, Catherine Morrison's eyes were fixed on Elijah's hands. In the back, Diane Brooks had her hands clasped together, silently praying. The first big climax approached. The music built in intensity, the piano and orchestra driving together toward a peak. Elijah's hands were racing now, playing powerful chords in both hands, octaves thundering in the left hand, while the right hand carved out melodic fragments. The sound filled the entire theater, massive, overwhelming, passionate. And then, just when it seemed the music couldn't get any bigger, it pulled back. The storm subsided into a quieter passage, more introspective. Elijah's touch lightened. His hands danced across the keys with delicate precision, playing quiet, shimmering figures high on the keyboard. This was one of the most technically difficult sections, rapid, quiet passages that required absolute finger control. One wrong note would be glaringly obvious. But Elijah's fingers didn't falter. The notes sparkled like light on water, perfectly even, perfectly controlled. The music moved through various episodes, passionate outbursts, tender moments, dramatic recitatives, where the piano seemed to be having a conversation with the orchestra. Elijah navigated it all with growing confidence. He wasn't thinking about technique anymore. He wasn't worried about making mistakes. He was just playing, letting the music flow through him. The development section arrived where Rachmaninoff took the main themes and transformed them, pushing them through different keys and moods. This was the heart of the movement, where the composer explored the emotional depths of the material. Elijah played it with raw honesty, not holding back. When the music called for power, he gave it power. When it called for tenderness, he played with heartbreaking delicacy. His body swayed with the phrases. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His breathing was deep and steady, matching the pulse of the music. He was completely absorbed, totally present. The second major climax was approaching the biggest moment in the entire movement. The music began to build again, the tension increasing measure by measure. The orchestra surged beneath him, and Elijah's hands prepared for what was coming, the massive cascade of chords that represented the emotional peak of the piece. And then it arrived. Elijah's hands came crashing down in powerful octaves, both hands playing the same notes, an octave apart, thundering down the keyboard in a descending pattern. The sound was immense, overwhelming, primal. The audience could feel it in their chests, the physical vibration of the piano at full volume. This was Rachmaninoff, unleashed all the passion, all the drama, all the triumph condensed into a few bars of music. The orchestra matched him, brass and strings combining in a glorious sound wall. Together they drove toward the final affirmation of the main theme, played forte, loud and bold and victorious. And then came the most difficult passage of the entire piece. After the big climax, there was a rapid descending passage in both hands, fast chromatic scales that required both hands to be perfectly coordinated, perfectly even. Elijah had practiced this section more than any other. His hands flew down the keyboard fingers, moving so quickly they were almost a blur. The notes were crystal clear, each one articulated the rhythm perfectly steady. The audience gasped. Even Harrison, watching from the wings, felt his confidence waver. The movement was approaching its conclusion now. The main theme returned one final time, but transformed, no longer yearning or tentative, but confident and resolved. Elijah played it with conviction, his hands strong and sure. The orchestra built underneath, and together they drove toward the final cadence. The last few measures were a race to the finish. rapid ascending figures, powerful chords, the momentum carrying everything forward with unstoppable force. Elijah's hands moved with precision and power, never hesitating, never doubting. And then came the final chord. Elijah's hands came down on a massive C major chord, not the C minor of the opening, but major bright triumphant. He held it, letting it ring out the sound, filling every corner of the theater. The orchestra sustained with him, and for a moment there was just that one glorious chord representing the journey from darkness to light, from struggle to triumph. And then it faded. Elijah's hands lifted from the keys. The orchestra's final notes died away in his earpiece. The movement was over. For 3 heartbeats, there was absolute silence in the Riverside Grand Theater. And then the place exploded. The audience erupted to their feet. The sound of applause was like thunder, not polite, not restrained, but wild and enthusiastic and genuine. People were shouting, "Bravo!" At the back of the theater, Elijah's mother was openly weeping her hands over her mouth. In the front row, Catherine Morrison was on her feet, applauding with her hands raised high, tears streaming down her face. Even some of the judges were standing, breaking protocol, unable to contain their reaction. Elijah sat frozen at the piano for a moment, barely processing what was happening. The sound of the applause washed over him like a wave. He had done it. He had actually done it. He had played Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto in front of hundreds of people, and he hadn't just survived, he had soared. Slowly, he stood. He turned to face the audience and bowed deeply, and the applause grew even louder. He bowed again and again. People were whistling. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. In the wings, Harrison Caldwell stood motionless, his face pale. He had just watched someone with no formal training, someone who learned from YouTube videos, someone he had mocked and dismissed, deliver a performance that had moved an entire theater to tears. Elijah finally walked off stage, his legs shaking so badly he nearly stumbled. As soon as he was in the wings, he had to lean against a wall. His hands were trembling, his heart was racing. He felt like he might pass out. A stagehand handed him a bottle of water. That was incredible. Absolutely incredible. Professor Matthews appeared from somewhere, putting a hand on Elijah's shoulder. The older man's eyes were wet. "Son, that was one of the finest performances I've ever witnessed. You didn't just play the notes. You told a story. You made people feel something real." "Thank you, Elijah," whispered his voice barely working. There was one more finalist to perform. Sarah Chen was playing Prokofiev's Piano Concerto No. 2. Elijah tried to compose himself enough to watch, but his mind was still reeling. Sarah's performance was technically excellent and musically sensitive, definitely worthy of being in the finals. But after what Elijah had just done, anything would have seemed anticlimactic. When Sarah finished, she received strong, respectful applause. And then the moderator announced that the judges would deliberate for 30 minutes before announcing the results. 30 minutes. 30 minutes that would determine everything. Elijah returned to the green room where the other finalists were gathered. Jennifer and Michael looked resigned. They knew they weren't going to win. Sarah looked hopeful, but realistic. Harrison sat in his corner, his jaw tight, saying nothing. Elijah sat down and closed his eyes. He was beyond nervous now. He had given everything he had. There was nothing more he could do. It was in the judge's hands now. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "I love you so much. You were beautiful. Your father would be so proud." Elijah's eyes burned with tears. He texted back, "Thank you for everything, Mom, for believing in me." The 30 minutes crawled by. Every second felt like an hour. Elijah's mind replayed his performance, analyzing every moment, wondering if he'd made mistakes he hadn't noticed, wondering if it had been enough. Finally, a stage manager appeared. "Finalists, please return to the stage." This was it. The 5 contestants filed back onto the stage, standing in a line facing the audience. The theater was still packed. No one had left. The energy in the room was electric. Catherine Morrison stepped up to the microphone at center stage. She looked at each of the finalists, her expression warm but serious. "Thank you all for your outstanding performances today," she began. "This competition showcases the finest young pianistic talent in our region, and all of you should be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished." She paused, letting the moment build. The judges had a difficult decision. We evaluated each performance on technical excellence, musical interpretation, emotional impact, and overall artistry. While all 5 performances had merit, there was one that stood out as truly exceptional. Elijah's heart was hammering so hard he thought it might explode. Catherine Morrison looked directly at him. The winner of this year's Riverside Piano Competition, receiving a cash prize of $50,000 and a full scholarship to the conservatory of their choice, is... The pause felt eternal. Elijah Brooks. For a moment, Elijah couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he'd just heard. And then the theater erupted again. The applause was deafening. People were on their feet, shouting, cheering. Elijah stood frozen, his mind trying to catch up with reality. He had won. He had actually won. Catherine Morrison was smiling broadly, gesturing for him to come forward. Elijah's legs moved on autopilot, carrying him to where she stood. She shook his hand warmly, then presented him with a trophy, a beautiful crystal piano on a wooden base, and a large ceremonial check for $50,000. "Congratulations, Elijah," she said, loud enough for her voice to carry through the microphone. "Your performance today was nothing short of extraordinary. You demonstrated not just technical skill, but genuine artistry and emotional depth. You moved every person in this theater. That's the mark of a true musician." Elijah managed to stammer out a thank you as cameras flashed around him. The other judges came on stage to congratulate him. Professor Matthews was there too, beaming with pride. "I knew you could do it," the professor said, pulling him into a brief hug. "That was magnificent." Through the crowd of well-wishers, Elijah saw his mother making her way toward the stage. Diane Brooks was openly crying, her face a mixture of joy and disbelief. When she reached her son, she threw her arms around him and held on tight. "My baby," she sobbed into his shoulder. "My beautiful, talented baby. You did it. You really did it." "We did it, Mom," Elijah said, his own tears flowing freely now. "This is for both of us, for all those double shifts, for believing in me. This is as much yours as it is mine." They held each other while cameras clicked and people applauded, and for that moment nothing else existed except a mother and her son celebrating a dream that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. Eventually, the judges ushered everyone off stage for interviews. Local news reporters wanted to talk to Elijah, wanted to know his story. He found himself sitting in front of cameras trying to articulate what this moment meant. "How does it feel to win?" one reporter asked. "Surreal," Elijah said honestly. "I still can't quite believe it's real. We understand you're self-taught. Is that true?" "Yes. I learned mostly from YouTube videos and library books. I practiced on an old keyboard I bought from a thrift store." The reporter's eyes widened. "And you just defeated some of the best trained pianists in the region. What would you say to young people who feel like they can't pursue their dreams because they don't have the right resources? Elijah thought carefully before answering. I'd say, don't let anyone else decide what you're capable of. The world will try to tell you who you are based on where you come from, what you look like, what you can afford. But talent doesn't care about any of that. If you want something badly enough, if you're willing to work for it, really work for it, then you have a chance. It won't be easy. You'll face rejection and doubt, and people who don't believe in you. But if you keep going, if you keep pushing, you might surprise everyone, including yourself. The interview went viral by that evening. By the next morning, Elijah's story was being shared across social media, covered by national news outlets. Self-taught pianist wins major competition, read the headlines. People were calling him inspiring a prodigy, an example of what determination could achieve. But in the days that followed, what mattered most to Elijah wasn't the media attention. It was what happened behind the scenes. The $50,000 prize meant his mother could finally quit one of her jobs, could finally rest, could finally take care of the health issues she'd been ignoring because she couldn't afford to take time off. That money meant security for the first time in years. The scholarship meant Elijah could attend the city conservatory full-time, studying with Professor Matthews and other renowned instructors. He would finally receive the formal training he'd always needed, could finally fix those technical rough edges, and develop his full potential as a pianist. 3 days after winning the competition, Elijah returned to the Riverside Grand Theater for a winner's recital, a solo concert showcasing his talent. The theater was packed again, filled with people who wanted to hear the young pianist who had captivated the city. Before the concert backstage, Elijah had an unexpected visitor. Harrison Caldwell stood in the doorway of the green room looking uncomfortable. He was dressed casually, jeans and a sweater without his usual polished armor. "Hey," Harrison said. "Hey," Elijah replied, genuinely surprised. Harrison stepped inside and closed the door. For a long moment, he just stood there, clearly struggling with what he wanted to say. "I owe you an apology," he finally said. "The way I treated you throughout the competition, it was wrong. I judged you before I ever heard you play. I made assumptions about who you were and what you were capable of based on things that had nothing to do with your actual talent." Elijah waited, saying nothing. "The truth is," Harrison continued, "I was threatened by you. I could see that you had something I don't have, this raw, genuine connection to the music. I've been trained my whole life, had every advantage, studied at the best schools. But I play like a technician. You play like an artist. And that scared me." He looked Elijah in the eye. "You deserved to win. Your performance was better than mine, better than everyone's. And I'm sorry for trying to make you feel like you didn't belong. You belonged there more than any of us." Elijah processed this for a moment. Part of him wanted to hold on to the anger to make Harrison suffer for the mockery and the dismissiveness. But another part, the part shaped by his mother's grace and his father's kindness, wanted to let it go. "Thank you for saying that," Elijah said. "That takes courage." Harrison nodded, looking relieved. "For what it's worth, I hope you go far. I think you will. You've got something special." They shook hands, not as rivals, but as two musicians who had shared something intense and transformative. After Harrison left, Elijah sat alone in the green room for a few minutes, reflecting on everything that had happened. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from an 8-year-old kid pecking out "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" on a cheap keyboard to a young man who had just won one of the most prestigious piano competitions in the state. He thought about his father and hoped that somewhere, somehow, James Brooks knew what his son had accomplished. He thought about his mother sitting in the audience right now, finally able to relax and enjoy watching her son perform without the weight of financial stress crushing her. And he thought about all the young people out there who might hear his story and dare to dream their own impossible dreams. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. 5 minutes, Mr. Brooks. Elijah stood and straightened his suit jacket, a new one, this time properly fitted, bought with his prize money. He walked toward the stage, and as he did, he passed a mirror. He stopped and looked at his reflection. The young man looking back at him had changed. Not physically, but in some deeper way. He stood taller. His eyes held more confidence. He looked like someone who knew his worth, who had proven to himself and to the world that he belonged. Elijah stepped onto the stage of the Riverside Grand Theater for the 3rd time. But this time was different. This time he wasn't a nervous contestant hoping to make it through. This time he was the winner, performing a winner's recital, taking his place among the serious musicians of the city. The audience applauded as he walked to the piano. He could see his mother in the 3rd row beaming with pride. He could see Professor Matthews, Catherine Morrison, and other judges from the competition. He could see familiar faces from his neighborhood who had come out to support him. Elijah sat at the Steinway and placed his hands on the keys. For his winner's recital, he had chosen a varied program pieces that represented his journey. He would start with that Chopin nocturne from the preliminaries. He would play the complete Beethoven Pathétique from the semifinals. And he would end with something new, Schubert's Impromptu in G-flat major, a piece that was both technically brilliant and deeply emotional. But before he began playing, Elijah did something unexpected. He stood and approached the microphone at the edge of the stage. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said, his voice carrying through the theater. "Before I play, I want to say something." The audience quieted completely. A lot has been said about me being self-taught, about my background, about this being an unlikely story. And all of that's true. But I want to make sure I acknowledge the people who made this possible. He looked at his mother. "Mom, everything I am, everything I've accomplished is because you sacrificed for me. You worked yourself to exhaustion so I could have opportunities. You never stopped believing in me even when it seemed crazy. This victory is yours as much as it is mine." Diane was crying again, nodding, mouthing, "I love you." Elijah continued. "I also want to thank Professor Matthews and the other judges who saw past my lack of formal training and recognized whatever talent I have. And I want to thank Mrs. Patterson at the public library, who made sure I always had access to music books and computer time." He paused, then said something that surprised even himself. "But most of all, I want to dedicate tonight's performance to my father, James Brooks. He passed away when I was 8 years old, but he's the reason I fell in love with music. He taught me that you don't need to be rich to appreciate beauty. You don't need fancy things to create something meaningful. You just need passion and persistence. Dad, this is for you." The audience applauded, many of them wiping their eyes. Elijah returned to the piano and began to play. The recital lasted 90 minutes, and it was magical. Every note was infused with the emotion of his journey, the triumph of the past weeks, the gratitude for the opportunities ahead. When he finally played the last notes of the Schubert Impromptu, a gentle, fading conclusion that felt like a sunset, the audience sat in reverent silence for a long moment before erupting into the loudest applause of the night. Elijah took his bows, feeling complete in a way he'd never felt before. He had done it. He had achieved the impossible. And this was just the beginning. 6 months later, Elijah Brooks stood in a practice room at the City Conservatory working on a Prokofiev sonata under Professor Matthews' guidance. His technique had improved dramatically with proper instruction. The rough edges were being smoothed away, replaced with refined facility and control. but he had never lost what made him special, that emotional directness, that ability to make the piano sing with genuine feeling. His mother had quit her night cleaning job and was now working just one job as a home health aide with reasonable hours and time to actually rest. She had started attending every one of Elijah's performances, sitting in the audience with pride radiating from her face. The conservatory had not only given Elijah a full scholarship, but had also hired him as a teaching assistant, working with young students who were just beginning their musical journeys. He loved helping kids discover the piano, especially those who came from backgrounds like his own. The story of the self-taught pianist who won the Riverside competition had inspired dozens of young people to pursue music regardless of their circumstances. Elijah received letters and messages from aspiring musicians around the country, thanking him for showing them that it was possible. Harrison Caldwell, true to his word at the apology, had become something like a friend. He was attending Juilliard now, but when he came home for breaks, he and Elijah would sometimes meet for coffee and talk about music. Their rivalry had transformed into mutual respect, and Elijah was being invited to perform at venues around the region. Small concert halls, university recitals, community events. He was building a reputation as a rising young pianist, not just as a feel-good story, but as a genuinely talented musician with a bright future. One evening, after a particularly good practice session, Professor Matthews pulled Elijah aside. "I have some news," the professor said. "I've been talking to some colleagues in New York. There's a summer program at the Manhattan School of Music that would be perfect for you. Full scholarship, of course. You'd study with some of the best pianists in the country, perform in master classes, even give a few concerts." Elijah's eyes widened. "New York, seriously? I think you're ready for the next level." "What do you say?" Elijah thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. "Yes. Absolutely yes." Professor Matthews smiled. "Good. Because I already told them you'd be coming." That night, Elijah went home and told his mother the news. She cried happy tears this time and insisted they celebrate with homemade tacos and the good ice cream from the grocery store. As they ate, Diane looked at her son with wonder. "Do you ever think about how far you've come? Just a year ago, you were practicing on that old keyboard in the living room, hoping to save up enough money for a better instrument. And now you're going to New York to study with world-class musicians." Elijah nodded. "I think about it all the time. Sometimes I still can't believe it's real." "It's real because you made it real," his mother said. "You worked harder than anyone I've ever known. You never gave up even when it seemed impossible. You earned this, Eli. We earned this," he corrected. "You and me together." Later that night, alone in his room, Elijah sat at his old Casio keyboard, the one from the thrift store, still with its cracked casing and sticky keys. He could have replaced it a dozen times over now with his prize money, but he kept it. It was a reminder of where he'd started, of the hunger and determination that had brought him this far. He played a few notes on the cheap keyboard, smiling at the tinny sound that was so different from the conservatory's grand pianos. Then he pulled out his phone and opened his voice memos app. "Note to self," he said into the phone. "Remember this moment. Remember what it felt like to dream the impossible dream. Remember the people who laughed and the people who believed. Remember the struggle and the triumph. Remember that talent can come from anywhere, and that the world doesn't get to decide what you're capable of, only you do." He paused, then added, "And remember to always play with heart. Technique matters. Training matters. But feeling matters most. That's what Dad taught me. That's what I'll never forget." Elijah put down his phone and looked at the photo of his father that sat on his desk, James Brooks, smiling at the camera, young and hopeful, unaware of the short time he had left. Elijah touched the frame gently. "I made it, Dad," he whispered. "I made it." And in that small room, in that modest apartment, in that working-class neighborhood, a young man who had refused to accept the limitations the world tried to place on him sat at an old keyboard and played a simple melody, the Chopin Nocturne, that had started it all. The notes floated through the apartment, imperfect and beautiful, a reminder that music doesn't need to be polished to be powerful. It just needs to be honest. And Elijah Brooks had learned to play with absolute honesty. It was his gift. It was his future. It was his father's legacy and his mother's reward. It was simply who he was. The story of the kid who learned piano from YouTube, who bought a keyboard from a thrift store, who faced mockery and doubt and impossible odds, and who stood on a stage and made an entire theater weep with the beauty of his playing, that story would inspire others for years to come. But for Elijah, it wasn't just a story. It was his life. And he was just getting started.